Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. Maybe good evening. We do have a number of registrations from parts of the world that are not here in Australia and New Zealand. So welcome to everyone. My name is Adam Beck, and I'm Executive Director for the Smart Cities Council in the Australia and New Zealand region. And I'm also Secretariat for the Centre for Data Leadership, which is the initiative that has the Smart Cities Council focusing in on all things data leadership. And this session today, this data dialogue, is one of a monthly series that we're doing to raise awareness around the core data leadership vitals, and in particular, bringing leaders together to share ideas and thoughts and experiences around how we are or not activating data. And today's topic around opening up on open data is certainly around that theme of activating data. We've got three great guests joining us for this session. I'll be introducing them, or they'll be introducing themselves very shortly. We cover all tiers of government, and of course we cover geographically both Australia and also New Zealand. So welcome. I'd like to first run through a few little quick notices here. After the introduction, we'll be jumping straight into the dialogue, and for those that have been or participated in one of our data dialogues previously, you'll know that it's very free-flowing, it's very unscripted, it's very much a dialogue as it suggests. And what we also do is we make sure that we bring in and field questions from the audience as we go along throughout the hour-and-a-half session. So please make sure that you put in the question box any relevant questions or comments that you'd like to ask any of the guests that we have with us today. The other thing I'd like to sort of highlight is that this recording, the video recording, will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. You'll also receive a link that'll come back to you through the registration process. But also this will be converted into a podcast on the Smart Cities Chronicles podcast for those that are more into listening rather than viewing. So plenty of options there to follow up and share with others. This data dialogue series is part of Smart Cities Week. That is typically on a normal non-COVID year, our in-person gathering of 3 days. That's not happening this year, so we've decided to take as much of our program as we can online. And our monthly data dialogue webinars are one part of a broader program of online engagements, all different types of sessions. We encourage you to head to the Smart Cities Week website, scwaustralia.com. In terms of the Centre for Data Leadership, the initiative that I mentioned that we launched earlier this year, the Smart Cities Council is really trying to help build awareness and capacity around the idea of data leadership. You can head to the website there, centrefordataleadership.com. And one thing you'll find there, among other items, is some resources. Earlier this year, we published the Data Leadership Vitals, which touch on those 5 core areas that we believe are critical to data leadership, that being data purpose, data privacy, data security, data ethics, and data governance. I'm sure we'll touch on some of those today. And we also recently followed up with a bit of a companion resource, the Data Leadership Readiness Questions. We've crafted 10 questions for each of those 5 vitals, which provide a little bit of a checklist, a little bit of an audit framework to sort of see where you're at and where you might need to build some greater capacity or build some awareness among your team or staff or other relevant stakeholders. So let's jump into it. So we have joining us from New Zealand, the Open Data Program with National Government over there, Paul Stone, Anjana Wily from ACT Government, running the Data Analytics Centre there, and also Matthew Shilscheck from City of Greater Geelong. I'm going to ask each of them in turn to give a bit of a introduction, and then we're going to kick off with a bit of a dialogue. Let's start with you, Paul. Welcome. Thanks for joining us from New Zealand. Who are you and what do you do? Oh, Paul, we've lost your audio there. You're still on mute. That's all right. Usually there's three of those for every webinar, so one down.
Sorry about that. So yeah, Paul Stone from Stats New Zealand. So I've been involved with the Open Data program for just on a decade, which has formally come to an end, but we're hoping that Open Data will be business as usual going forward. And so that work has been very much around encouraging and supporting government agencies to implement the Declaration of Open and Transparent Government, proactively releasing data. So
Brilliant.
is this where you want?
Paul,
yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul, and thanks for joining us from across the ditch there. Matthew, who are you and what do you do?
Yes, thanks, Adam. Matthew Shilscheck. I am the Senior Lead of Smart Cities for the City Greater Geelong, of which we're currently not in lockdown. For those that know where Victoria and Melbourne is, we're progressing that way, but not yet. I manage the Open Data program as part of my portfolio at the City, and we've been in this space now for roughly 6 years or so been a lot of wins for us in Open Data.
Excellent. Looking forward to hearing those as well. Thanks, Matthew. Anjana, you know how this goes. Who are you and what do you do?
Hello from the Ngunnawal Nation here in the ACT. So I lead the ACT Data Analytics Centre. I'm Anjana Wily in the ACT government. So the ACT is a one-level government, both local and state, as a territory that we are. And so the ACT Data Analytics Centre, we sit inside the Office of the Chief Digital Officer, and our job in open data is really to help the government drive better release of our data on the open data platform, which is act.gov.au. We in the centre really, our core reason for being is in fact to uplift data capabilities across government, and part of that is to build the foundational data governance and management work. But importantly, why? It's to push data back out to the community so they can benefit.
Excellent. Anjana, thanks so much for that introduction, and also Paul and Matthew. Anjana shared the ACT government URL there, data.act.gov.au, for our guests that have a notepad and pen or have some other electronic way of taking notes. You can also head into a browser and look at what New Zealand have been doing, data.govt.nz. And Matthew's going to speak to, I am sure, the City of Greater Geelong's data exchange. You can head to geelongdataexchange.com.au. So just among our three great guests with us today, some amazing data and websites where you can go and see what they've been up to. Okay, so we have our opening warm-up question now for our delegates who are listening and watching in. I've asked each of our guests to take 2 minutes to answer a question, an opening question that I've given them. It's sort of a fill-in-the-blank question. The question is, on open data, I believe blank. Fill in the blank. Matthew, I'm going to ask if I can open with you.
Sure.
The question again, on open data, I believe. I'm going to set the timer. I'm going to give a 1 minute sort of indication, then 30 seconds. For those that know me, I like to keep to time. I'm going to open up the timer here. Matthew, on open data, what do you believe? Go.
On open data, I believe that governments have an important role to play in leadership and driving the data economy. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, that the data space and the growth of data in this digital economy is so rapid that there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of trust issues, and there's a lot of personal and private issues. And I think governments have a role in showing how we can better use data and how we can better share data so that others out there that have the skills can open up and tell us those insights that we can't see. We know from our own experience that that putting it out there helps others understand what we do and how we do it. And again, that's transparency in government. And whilst not everything can be transparent, obviously you take into that privacy consideration. There's a lot of industry and a lot of good use can happen from governments sharing data with communities and businesses alike to develop that economy and develop sort of the knowledge and sharing around those particular places. So from my perspective and my personal opinion, governments have a strong leadership role in opening data and also leading by example in this space.
Okay, 1 minute 30 seconds, Matthew. That this is not a game, of course, or a competition, but Matthew did come in at 1 minute 30. So Mr. Paul Stone, Paul, we head over to you now. Complete the question or finish the question on open data. I believe, over to you. The timer has started.
Yeah, well, I believe that it's more about culture change than data, actually. So the data is definitely valuable, but when it comes to trying to get it open, it's very much about the culture. The culture from two aspects. There's the open government aspect, so it's about being transparent and accountable, but it's also about thinking beyond our jobs and thinking about the greater good for our nations and, well, in some fronts for the world. And then also, I guess it's about valuing data as an asset. And so when I talk about data as an asset, data can create value when it's used. If it sits somewhere idle, that's not creating any value. And so what I've been trying to encourage public servants back here at home is that we are custodians of a public data asset. And as such, we have a responsibility to make data available for reuse, because the more data is reused, the more value it's going to create. And so, yeah, so between treating data as an asset and actually thinking about being open and transparent and trusted as a government, I think open data is, yeah, all about culture. Thanks.
Okay, 1 minute 25. A delightful panel of guests so far, helping me with my my time issues. Anjana, complete the sentence on open data. I believe. Over to you.
So same as Matthew and Paul on open data, I believe that we as government can be more transparent and accountable to the community about our data holdings, and through releasing more data, we can support community engagement, but really uplift health and well-being, unlock innovations, enable businesses to uncover new opportunities, build new services, drive new products out into the community, but really resulting in a community that is better connected and I hope empowered to make decisions. In the ACT, like all governments, we really are wanting to release more data out there on our open website, and really, as Paul said, building the culture within government as a foundation of good data practice, that we are safe in data flows out to the community and that people are protected. We're working with data in ethical ways. But I suppose an example of this is the recent fires that we had, and we were all monitoring our air quality, and that was on the open data portal. Many people used the data that was published. And why? Because we wanted to make sure that those that needed to be supported through the times when we, in fact, Canberra had the worst air in the world. And so the community was informed day to day based on what data was out there, so people could make decisions about keeping themselves safe. So that's very important.
Thanks, Anjana. Bushfires, of course, over the Australian summer were nothing short of a disaster and crisis. We followed that straight up with a health pandemic because bushfires weren't enough. Can I turn our conversation firstly to sort of our current situation with COVID-19. And the Smart Cities Council did some totally unscientific survey work recently in asking people if they had one data set that they could access during the real peak of COVID-19. I want to kind of say, you know, April, May, June, when we were all trying to work out what was happening. We were going into deep lockdown, small businesses were closing left, right, and center. If there was one data set that you really wish you had, what would it be? I'd like a response from each of you around that. I know that I'm putting you right on the spot, but it may be something that you heard, or a data set that was in high demand that no one had, or upon reflection now you think that if we did have this data set, it could have really helped. Is there any thoughts from you that you'd like to share on that question? And what data set did you wish you really had but you didn't?
Well, I'll start because I'm in the midst of it and have been since April, and that's not one data set, but many. One being obviously the COVID-19 rates in the community. I know the Data 61 are doing some data modeling. I know that other universities are doing data modeling, and for them, that data is really important to help us build the scenarios around what's next, what's happening, situational intelligence. But I suppose within government, we need to build other responses. So as we're in lockdown, as we come out of lockdown, what are the recovery measures? What are the things that we need to put in place so that the community is safe while we are also building back our economy? So data sets such as from the federal government, the JobKeeper data, the JobSeeker data, all really helpful to understand where the risks are, where are the vulnerable people, where are the vulnerable businesses, and how do we help build and rebuild our communities. So breadth of data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your comment there, Anjana, around vulnerable businesses is one that certainly has been common. Paul, Matthew, who wants to go next? Is there a key data set or two that you really wish you had?
Yeah, I could probably follow on from that. And it's probably not so much not having the data, but we didn't really have a single view of that data. So there's a lot of data that Geelong has, and a lot of different data sets, but trying to actually have all that into one particular view started to create sort of little levels of confidence in understanding, well, you've got business data affected, you've got business data aggressive, and state's giving us business data effective. Okay, which number's right? And is that what's actually coming through? And how come you've got information on that business and I've got information on that business and we've got two different numbers? So from our perspective, it was more that we didn't have a lack of data. It's just that there was no clarity around how you bring all that together into to create that picture of actually what is actually taking place and how much effort is actually going into understanding these particular areas.
Yeah, okay. Paul, what did you see or hear over there?
So starting with the data set that was available, I was quite surprised about how well used our census data was. It became the basis of the models for prediction. It became the basis of people trying to, they would mesh it with, say, job data or occupations, looking at what would be the areas of employees that would be hardest hit through lockdown. Yeah, it just became a bit like land data becomes the basis for so many geographical visualizations. The census became very much a base data set for responding to the COVID situation. In terms of data that I would have liked to have seen, so I guess gets into a bit of a little bit of a tension between privacy and openness. But during lockdown, and when we were hearing about more cases becoming available, we were getting good data through the COVID-19 site in New Zealand, but it wasn't very granular geographically. So I felt, and we've had some meetups around this, open data meetups, and people have talked about how they wanted more local data. They wanted to know about their neighbourhood. They wanted to be able to make, as Anjana was saying before, making decisions about what to do. So if there was, when things are at a very large regional level, you can't use that to make a decision about, oh, it's actually safe for me to go out to, we had some freedoms within our lockdown, but different people felt more vulnerable about doing so. And and if you've got vulnerable family members, even when the restrictions start being lifted, you want to know where the cases are starting to still be around in your neighbourhood, not in a big region. So suburb level was we discussed was a relatable geographical area which meant something, and you could make a decision on. So yeah, it'll be interesting to. I mean, I realise there are challenges with that, because particularly when numbers are small, there are issues around anonymity as a result of that. But I think once the numbers crank up, the more we can make it, more granular we can make it, the better.
Has there anything, has the last little period, 3-6 months, resulted in any specific open data action or investment on the behalf of your organisations? Is there anything particular that you're doing to respond to COVID-19 from an open data perspective?
So from in the ACT government, I suppose we've had requests for things like, how are people moving about town? So the mobility of people given lockdowns and releases of restrictions, I suppose that's been a really interesting conversation. And so some of the data obviously is in the private sector, such as all the mobile networks, so how are people moving around? But they're private data. So from ACT government's perspective, we continue to release data about, for instance, our public transport data. So they kind of continue to be a priority for us. But over time, we do hope, as the community comes to us with we would appreciate hearing more about what's going on in these spaces, that I think our job is to open it up, I suppose. So currently, in the last 4 months, we've literally been in respond, recover, but as GovHack is about to come on, which is really exciting. So we do want to continue to release data to build, I suppose, the community back up. So as businesses want more data, we will look into releasing as we go, I suppose.
Yeah, okay. Matthew or Paul?
Yeah, from our perspective, it's a similar case. I think it was really one of an awareness of data and the sources of that data, and how do you collate it very quickly and with a level of confidence. And as we touched on, we've had a lot of inquiries around movement data. We have sensors that collect pedestrian data in the CBD and traffic and parking and those statistics, and we'll quite easily be able to see the drop off and the peaks. The Mother's Day peak that we saw all of a sudden in the CBD again, when people were meant to be in lockdown, but other states opened up, and therefore our city opened up all of a sudden. So you can start to see patterns that emerge, but it was really from not so much an open data perspective, but one of how do we start to better acquire or access that data, and where does it actually exist within the city? We're only one organization in the city that collects a lot of this data, and as we touched on, there's phone data, there's traffic data, there's 20 or 30 organizations that collect a lot of data that create valuable insight for us. But how do we better work and collaborate with these so that some of that can come through to help the decision makers create insight, but other parts can then be shifted back out to the community so they're aware of what's taking place and how they can look after themselves and be a bit more informed about what's taking place. So that's really some of the insight that's come from us.
Yeah, okay. Paul, I suppose just that question as well to you, but also maybe in the context you mentioned, in your opening there that the open data program is kind of, it sounds like it's coming a little bit to an end, but you're hoping it's going to live on. What's happening there, and why is that the case? As well as answering that question, you know, did sort of COVID give you or sort of force you into any particular open data action or investment, you know, over the past little while?
Okay. Well, firstly, I'll just respond to the other guys and their conversation around the mobile data, mobile device data. So I've pasted in the chat a link, but I can't seem to send that to everyone. So dataventures.nz, COVID-19, is a site where, so Data Ventures before the pandemic, we're working on a data trust arrangement where they were taking the data from mobile phone service providers and using that data to, what they were doing is they were bringing the data together, anonymizing it, and then making it available to use to track population movements. So that was, and then reselling that as a product to help inform business decisions, tourism, and all that sort of thing. And what happened when the lockdown came about is they realized that they could repurpose this to track movements of the population and report not only to the government but to the public to demonstrate that, in fact, we were collectively responding to the requirements to lockdown. And even over our most mobile weekend, normally over Easter, you know, we stayed in place. So it's a great example of taking data and processing it in a trusted environment under trusted arrangements, and then making it available for the purpose here. In terms of more generally, there's not been any specific investment as a result as yet. We're certainly learning a lot as we go, and we can use the situation as a lever to help people understand that, you know, if this data had been available, we'd have been able to do things. Probably one of the biggest, most interesting things that got highlighted was our propensity to publish information first, not data. So even on our national COVID-19 site, things were published on a web page, but not in data. And it took people lobbying to me through the open data program, say, hey, can we have the data? Because we want to be able to take the data and visualize it in our own way to help people understand it. And then when we got further down the track and started releasing economic indicators, once again, it was initially published as a PDF. And it's like, my goodness, after all this time, you know, we're back in the 90s again. Fortunately, we've got some conversations going between agencies, and Stats New Zealand has been created a portal to be able to release their own data and data on behalf of some other agencies as well. So we've got a very good dashboard of a whole lot of health, social and economic indicators being updated weekly now, and some cases daily. So yeah, so it's helped, I guess, highlight our publishing habits and how they need to change. But also Stats New Zealand and their portal have taken the bold step of releasing data that hasn't gone through the usual scrutiny before being released. So they've moved things from being monthly or quarterly updates to daily or weekly, and putting up their hands and saying, hey, you know, don't trust this data as much as you would trust it normally, but hopefully it's still useful. And the data user community are going, thank you. Some data is better than no data, and we will use it accordingly. So it's been an interesting shift, which I hope has long-term effect. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Paul. In your summaries there was sort of a common golden thread through all of your responses. You know, that there is a duty to, you know, publish data and open it to be transparent. Technically, the taxpayer paid for it. You know, there's a lot of those good principles, right, that underpin the idea and the value of opening up data. Something happened recently that I thought was really interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. The city of Ipswich in southeast Queensland on the 1st of July launched its Transparency and Integrity Hub. It's early days, and it's going to build and grow in terms of what it does and what it has on there. They've started by publishing essentially their finances, from recent years. So opening up data, but it's data that I don't think we've necessarily really been familiar with on the average data portal, open data portal. It's essentially where every cent was spent, down to, the cab ride to the airport, which was for the purposes of flying to this place with an airline ticket, at the cost of X for the purposes of Y. This is, I'm putting you on the spot here. I don't know if you've all seen it, but the publishing of financial data, where government is spending taxpayers' money, is an interesting one in terms of a data set, I think. I would love to know, I mean, I've done a quick scan, Matthew, of the Geelong Data Exchange, and equally, Anjana, I've been on and looked at very quickly some of the multiple data sets. Where does the publishing of where government spends its money, in detail, where does that fit in the open data world? Is Ipswich just, is the mayor, who of course comes from a open data background, is she off the reservation here, or is this potentially a new kind of benchmark that we're potentially going to see more and more of? And Paul, just to bring you into this as well, so that we're all one big happy family, I note in the Stats NZ strategy that idea of transparency and trust with the public, is a core goal of open data. And I feel like there's no better place to start to build trust with the community than to tell them how you're using their money. So I'm open for anyone to kind of respond or comment to that little sort of ramble that I gave.
Yeah, well, I'll respond. So yes, it's a challenging area. As a public servant, the feeling of somebody watching over your shoulder every move comes to mind, I have to be honest. But on the other hand, transparency and accountability for taxpayer dollars is also a good argument. It's not new. I think the city of Chattanooga in the States had an open checkbook account way back, about 2014. But interestingly, so in New Zealand, we have this luxury of being perceived to be the most uncorrupt country in the world. But I think there's a risk of us resting on our laurels there, because when you look at it, there's very little data to provide evidence for that. We get that rating based on our policies, legislation, code of ethics for public service, etc. But there's very little data to prove that. And earlier this year, in fact, about 2 weeks before lockdown, we had an event called Open Data, Open Potential. And for that, I invited over a pair from Colombia, Carlos Rosa, and he led the Open Data program over there. And they got him to share a story about how in Colombia, the probably least trusted government in the world, or one of them, there was a strong perception that is corrupt there. So they took that head on with open data, exactly like what Ipswich are doing, detailed expenditure, for all of their procurement, from the rats and mice right through to the major contracts. along with open data of all the companies register and so forth. And what they did is they opened that data and then worked with civil society actively to reconcile it, essentially. And through that process, yes, they found evidence of corruption, but they also found a lot of error and a lot of processes that need changing. And so what really happened was that trust grew very, very strongly, not only because it was a collaborative effort working on it, and you know, the government was vulnerable in doing it, but while working on it together, there was a trust and relationship, but also the realization that, you know, there's human error, and that it wasn't all bad news, and you know, and that they're building a lot better ecosystem as a result. So they're starting from a very different place, but as I said, you know, we think we're in a trusted place, but the data is the evidence. And at the end of the day, as much as you get that feeling of being looked at over the shoulder, you need to be accountable. And so I actually think it's challenging, but it's a really good thing to do.
Excellent.
And yeah, we've got some
work
to do in New Zealand. Sorry, and we've got some work to do on it in New Zealand.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Anjana, are you sort of primed to say something there?
Yeah, no, agree with Paul. I suppose as government, our Westminster system, our core values within the public services, transparency, accountability, so trust-based systems is very important. In the ACT government, one of the things that we have started, in fact, is to start to publish on open data our capital work spending. So that started with the last budget, but having this year going a bit sideways with COVID, so we didn't have our normal budget process. But yeah, so we've started the journey. But to the point of trusted use and foundational practice, one of the core things is in fact building underneath the systems around what data, why, and how. So making sure that we have good data management and governance practices underlying our work, whether it is in fact in terms of our financial spend, in terms of our HR work, but also in terms of all policy initiatives and programs and service delivery. So I suppose we started the journey to publish our capital works data. The next space will be continuing to expand that. But you know, I think it really does come down to making our data discoverable through open data, but also then obviously making sure that if we can build community trust through different forums, being open, being proactive, and providing clear, accessible information. So I mean, our budget data is always released. It's released in PDFs. It's released on websites. Really, the next game is, in fact, just to make it machine readable. And I think that's the process is underway. It's just about uplifting our data capabilities underneath to make it happen.
Yeah, okay. Matthew, anything to throw into the ring here?
Yeah, look, I agree with both comments there, and I think some of those points are quite valid, and it's quite interesting from a local government perspective. We're actually legislated to release some of this data, you know, our spend data, our budget data, various things under FOI and so forth. So you sort of think about it, and some of the debate that I've had is, hang on, we publish it over here. How come we just can't take that and make it more easily readable over here? And I think something, as Paul said, is that fear of error and, oh my God, someone's going to pick up something that we've done wrong. And we've had that debate about parking data, that it is what it is. And if we don't like it ourselves, then we need to do something about that. But then when we share it out there, it creates this sort of notion that I have to react or do something about it to make it look better than what it is. So I think when I put my MAV technology hat on and chair of that across the councils, really what I start to see, it's not that councils don't want to do this, it's just there's just the skill and knowledge on how to do it and the technical ability to do it in an easy way that that really makes it difficult for a lot to put it out there. I mean, Ipswich is great in what they've done. It's really easy to use. It's easy to get to. It's easy to download and access. But I know regionally there's a lot of smaller councils in Victoria that would never even know where to start to do something like that, even if they wanted to. So there is definitely a culture, a skill, and then a want or an aptitude to deliver that sort of thing that sort of starts to come into this particular space.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm with you on about half of that. I think, you know, I mean, and the caveat here is I'm not a data guy, but a data set, you know, if you can bring smart parking into an open data portal, you can bring an expense account of your councillors in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Technically, right, as a data set.
It's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Whether the appetite is there to publicly disclose the annual entertainment expenditure of council members, that, you know, we're sort of playing with different metrics and sort of risk levels and issues now, I'd imagine. So certainly one to watch, and thank you for responding to that. I want to go head first into, you know, really today's topic, opening up on open data. Plenty of discussions and webinars about how awesome we are and what we're doing. So the baseline here is all three of you as my guests are doing fantastic work, amazing work. But I want you to share something that's gone wrong. Let's just sort of start to sort of open up about open data. What can you share that resembles, I won't use the word failure, I'll soften it by saying a really good, solid lessons learned. Could be anything. Let's just start there and see what comes. Well, give me a lessons learned. A nice way of saying sort of something didn't work. Can anyone share anything with me, or is that too transparent?
I'll start.
Yeah, go for it.
So, well, I mean, the project is a success, but not the way we thought. And I guess the lesson learned is useful. So we had a project where we wanted to improve the quality of open data, not just the quantity, but the quality. And so we started down the path with data inventories. So the idea was that to get quality open data, it needs to be well managed, and you can't manage what you don't know you've got. So let's start with a foundational step and get data inventories. So we set out on a project where we would use some of our program budget to pay for vendors to go into agencies and catalyze a data inventory for them. So this is free to the agency, just all it would require is some of their time. But we would provide a resource to do 6 weeks work equivalent to get an inventory off the ground for them. And so that was one reason for doing it. The other reason was whenever we went out to civil society and said, hey, what data do you want access to? What's some value to you? And they'd turn around and say, well, what have you got? So that brought home the picture that people don't actually know. They might have some guesses about what data there is held, but they really don't know what government agencies hold. And so we thought transparency around what data is held where would be really useful. So with these two reasons, we set about on a project. And interestingly, it took us a long time to actually win over our first customer. And even then, the uptake was really slow. And then just about when we're about to run out of time and money, suddenly everybody gets the idea and wants a piece of it. But the challenge was so part of the deal was that the data inventory would be made available as open data on data.gov.nz. So it'd be, as somebody said, it's very meta of us, but we would have data about data held by agencies, whether it was open or not. So part of the attributes of the inventory was, is it open, yes or no? And where it is, we can use scripts to automate the updating of data.gov. And if it's not open, can it be open? And if not, why not? So it was about setting expectations and enabling the conversation for somebody that wants access to data to solve a problem, to at least have a conversation with the agency and say, well, can I use it under these conditions for this purpose, at the very least? Or, okay, you said you're going to make it available once you've, or it might not be available until you've got the resource to anonymize it, but can I get access now for this project, sort of thing. And the challenge was getting that actually published, so that we did this project, we got them doing their data inventories, and we thought it was all okay, that at the end of it they would publish it. But suddenly, no, don't know if we're allowed to publish that, and they needed to get approval from governance groups, or every agency had a different process. But I guess the key lesson learned is that when it comes to saying you're going to be transparent with something, make sure that everybody's on board. And I guess we underestimated that. And so you need to get buy-in from the top down. Now, having said that, the inventories have been a great success, because essentially, it's like to quote Miley Cyrus, it's not the mountain, it's the climb. There's been so much benefit from doing the inventory. There's the realization of duplication, of gaps, of the quality of the data. As you'd expect from any kind of good data inventory process, it's been really valuable to do that. But when it comes to transparency, you make sure that you have buy-in from the top down before you put the effort in.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Taylor Swift once said, Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. Okay, so
who would have thought?
Anjana, yes.
Yeah, I've got two things that I'd like to add. And look, Paul and Matthew have already talked about I guess the requirements within government to uplift our data culture, our data literacy, our capabilities. And I've worked in all levels of government now, and I think my experience is across the board that there's a breadth of data capabilities, and some agencies, some organizations are much more mature at building an open data program and pushing data out. And I mean, part of the reasons is, hey, let's make it simple and easy for the community to see this data rather than us waiting for an FOI. But really, I think that the broad effort is there. The commitment is there. We have an open data policy that we're committed to. So what it means is slowly but surely uplifting our capabilities. So as Paul mentioned, the inventory project, again, making your data discoverable is your number one first step. And how do we gamify and make it simple for people? I think that's our goal. So we are releasing a data governance and management framework where we are helping people along the data life cycle to saying, hey, at some point, we're going to have to make a decision about releasing this data out and open. Let's do it up front. Let's be clear about what we're collecting, why we're collecting it, and how we're then going to store it, use it, share it, but release it as well. So kind of thinking about open data at the outset, I suppose. An example of a failure, and because I'm not a technical person either, but I mentioned the bushfires here in the ACT, and I'm not kidding you, on Christmas Eve, our API link died from one of the sensors. So again, direct from sensors to open data, the data wasn't getting refreshed. So midnight, at some point between midnight and 4 a.m., something happened and it clicked over and it updated. So I think there's this constant fear of, is the data actually, especially if it's real time, is do we trust the system? Do we trust the pipeline? Do we trust the APIs that someone had written? Did something fall down? And so for someone to then contact me, so in fact it was the chief health officer that said, hey, the data's not being uploaded on the website. People are really keen to see this number. Has the number changed? Has it gotten worse? So they're really important things, is that there is a whole journey to putting data onto open data, whether it's live stream based data to data that we actually manually upload in CSV form. So really, again, it's about making sure that we are open and transparent about what we've done on the open data platform itself, putting up what is it that the connection is about, so that people can be aware, and that quickly and simply change or fix the problem. And so yeah, so by the time we got to Christmas Day, I figured Santa must have arrived, so it was really a good thing. But that happens, right? So again, that's one example, but there are others, I imagine, that all governments face over time, when the data might not be as current as the community might want it, or the data might not be as complete as the community wants it. So that's what the open data program is for, is to hear back from the community that, hey, that data's not right, it's not complete enough, you need to give us more, or you need to give it to us in this way. So as a whole of government, we need to keep listening and hearing from people about what they want, why they want it, and how.
Anjana, thanks for that. Matthew, do you want to share a lessons learned? Did something go wrong at some point?
And I think it's a sort of even more basic level, and whilst I've experienced both sort of scenarios that we've talked about here, I mean, really back for us sort of going a few years ago, there was this race to see how much open data you can release, and it was a number of data sets that you're out there. And there wasn't really this sort of understanding of why and what's the purpose of that. And to some extent, the broader audience out there is probably still scratching their head as to why and what we're going to do with that. And the data people out there are the ones that would ultimately do that. But I think some of the more basic things is understanding, pick one data set and understand why you want to release that and what benefits you think the community or the business community may come from that, and even start to provide examples around how that may be used. And I think that for us was where we've sort of paused of recent years to take stock of where we've got to really ask ourselves, well, we are releasing this. What do we expect will happen when we do that, and how may people use this, and what benefit may they get from that? Because we can go out there and put hundreds and hundreds of data sets on there and say we're transparent and wonderful, but if no one actually wants to use them, or no one can actually understand it or get an insight into it, then what's the point of spending all that time and effort in publishing it out? So I think one of the biggest lessons for us is making sure that when we go out now, we really go, well, why am I going to publish air quality data? How is that going to help something? How can I link it into other things? Why have I published drainage data? Who does that benefit? Oh, there's a whole community of developers out here that really want to understand where that was, and they don't have to ask us any longer. So it's really understanding those audiences around that, and that's been a big lesson for us over the last period.
I'd like to go to the questions box for a moment. There's a couple of questions here. I'm going to take one here. Luke's got a big question here, a sort of rolling series of questions, which, as I read them, there's an interesting sort of mega question that's mounting in my mind. Matthew, there's a little bit of Geelong in here. Let me go through this. Let me go through this, and we'll come back. Is the Geelong Data Exchange a duplication of the data on data.gov.au? Could self-service could self-service be easier with integration? Could I pull this data into, for example, Snowflake Data Marketplace? How can we make data easily available across councils? So there's a lot of good questions there. A common data framework to be published. This rolls on to Kanav's questions as well. Is there a framework to determine what data is still needed and what data will be published as open? What are the steps you take? when I go into data portals, you're all doing fantastic work. They kind of all look the same to me. And one will have 1,000 data sets, one will have 200. I acknowledge that everyone's on a journey. I'll read the preamble text before the tables that say we value data, we want to be transparent. It's kind of like the same script that I kind of read everywhere. I'd like to talk about open data innovation. I don't like the word innovation. I want to talk about where open data goes next. Is anything new happening with open data? And what open data portals are doing now are fantastic. But Luke does prompt us to sort of think about this idea of, and Matthew, the word in yours is exchange.
Yeah.
Right. That gives me the sense that it is more, that the idea of exchange is more than just pushing out, right?
Yeah.
Here's
definitely.
the open data set, go for it. Whoever you are, whatever you do, great. If this is of interest, go use it. But for me, that word exchange is a lot more powerful, and it's giving me a sense that it's two-way. It's giving me a sense that I can trade. Where are we at with the idea of open data being more than just pushing out? Totally acknowledging the value of that, but where is this going? It's got to be more than just pushing out at some point, right?
And I think this is where Geelong has got to in the sort of last 12, 18 months, where we are pushing out all of this information, but actually in the same time we ingest all of this data from other organizations, and there is a two-way exchange. But you're creating copies, you know, there's the technical ability that, oh, I've got a spreadsheet, I've got a ingest feed, or if you're smarter, you have web connections, so forth. For us, though, we started to look at, well, where is that evolution? And it is that case that if I put information X out there and you collect information Y and we put them together, does that create a better data set that we both get value from, but then there's a part of that that then can be pushed out to the community to create value, greater value? And that's where we've really started looking at the notion of exchange, in that I can take a complete data set and give parts of that off to various people, both privately and publicly, to create value for them. But at the same time, it creates a greater knowledge for us in how we can sort of drive insight for the city. And then that's something that even Geelong's still grappling with. I mean, the more and more we talk with our local businesses and local government, they're starting to come around and see the value in it, that they can try it out, and they can. There's one particular organization that I've been working for over a number of years, and they're still very reluctant to give it out, even though they already give it out in some form or another in terms of data. But it's about that notion that if we do it in a safe and manageable way, that there is a greater benefit to all, and then we actually develop new services that aren't duplicating other sources of data, where the data economy comes into. And again, this is not a new notion. This is happening in Europe, it's happening in the US. There's a number of exchanges. You go to the data, the civic trust factor, or banks have been doing it for years. You know, where does spend data come from? Well, I can go to one place and get that. So it's, how do you start to build a data platform for a city whereby organizations can pull in and pull out in various models? And that's where then open data starts to create more value, because you can start to create some of that value by scraping it out and push it out there. And we have some internal strategies at the moment that are going through around data strategy and governance. We're about push something out to council tonight around transparency around our process, but again, it's still scratching the surface. So for me, there's still a lot of conversations going on around, where does this value sit? How do we use it? How do we manage it? How does it build forward? But the only way we get to do that is via examples, and it's taking those little steps towards that greater goal.
Paul, Anjana, a response to that one?
Yep. So I'm speechless. I'm trying to decide which way to go first. So both you, Adam and Matthew, have talked about, you know, why invest in putting this data out there if no one's going to use it. But it really comes down to the difference between, so more internationally, through the Open Data Charter and the open data community globally, there's this real drive now for publish with purpose. So you publish data that's going to contribute towards some policy like climate change or gender equality and so forth. For me, that's the short-term game, and the long-term game is open by default. So what open by default means is that you don't decide what the value in the data is. You don't decide what innovation is going to come with it. You simply make the data available so that when somebody else has a problem to solve, they can access the data readily. So the problem with you, Adam, going to a data portal and going, oh, well, look, but the same problem is you haven't got actually a problem in mind that you're trying to solve. So it's, you know, it's like looking at an encyclopedia. What shall I learn today? So our job is to systematically release data so that when there's a problem that the data is useful for, people can access it straight away and use it. Okay, so when somebody wants to build a health and safety app that uses data about where is the location of all our you know, hazardous substances, they can access the data and use that to help their customers keep safe. You know, data, as I said, data doesn't have any value until it's used, but it's only going to get used to solve problems. And if somebody has a problem to solve and they have to go for an information request process, which might take 6 to 8 weeks, it'll be obsolete by the time they get a hold of it. Okay, so our goal as a program has been to get to the point where we are systematically releasing data by design, like what Anjana said earlier, thinking about open from the start of the process. We had New Zealand Police actually put into their information strategy a governance body that didn't, when they started designing a new data set that they were going to start collecting, they asked not will this be open, but how will we open this? And it might be as a single data point because of the type of data and protection that it needed. But more to the point that they were thinking from the start how they were going to collect this data, store it, manage it, and make it, and how was it going to be made available for the New Zealand community. And as a result, the actual release of data becomes effortless. It's just a byproduct of doing government business. And so if we can get to the point where we are systematically releasing data as a byproduct of doing government business, then it becomes a marginal cost to actually make it available, and it will be there ready to be snapped up and used for any innovative ideas thought of by the community going forward. I've been dying to say that, thanks.
Yeah, okay. Anjana, what have you got to add to this?
Oh, look, likewise, jealous of the dataventures.nz piece of the data exchange with Geelong, but I suppose my common statements across the board for many years has been that the now of government is to enable seamless data flows with trust and safety and security by design. But to Paul's point on open by default, that's genuinely where we want to take our data practice, is that the benefit to the community is, in fact, if we are to build a data economy, if we are to continue to grow a digital economy in Australia, our goal is, as government, to release as much data as possible and see the innovations come, I suppose. And so for us, building those foundational data practices is essential, because we know trust, safety, security is about making sure that we are working with data in ways that the community will know that we are keeping their data safe. So I suppose that's one of our foundational things, is that we want to ensure trust with the community, that the data that we use on your behalf is done in safe ways. But where we need to release, we will, so that the community can continue to benefit as well. So yeah, absolutely would love to see more data ventures like that, so more co-ops, more data exchanges, and really let the community work with the data to build and really uplift health and well-being products and services out there. And I think it's already starting. It's just about all governments working assuredly to build our data practices.
America's got some questions on the question sort of box here, which I think are really interesting and tie into this. One of them is, does open data in its current format facilitate council collaborating with organisations in and beyond the community? I suppose council or any tier of government. Does your open data in its current format allow you to collaborate with organisations in and beyond the community?
Is that's directed at me, I'm taking?
Well, I mean, we could substitute council with state or territory or national government, but let's start with you, Matthew. Yeah, the word council is in there.
It definitely has. I mean, we've found that having it open over a period of years, that we've been able to work with a lot of smaller businesses and larger businesses that have really started to find value in the data and started to create that innovation that Paul said, which is part of that. Well, we're not sure what we're going to do with it, so let's just put it out there and see what comes of it. And oh, by the way, someone's created this app that shows us that if I drop something down this drain here, this is where it ends up in the ocean. And our environmental department are going, oh my God, that is the best thing I've ever seen in my life. How can we use this more often? So there's a lot of that smaller business out there that they got a more exploratory, more innovative, more looking to find what's in the data, how can they get value from that we're working with locally to use that, especially now even in the IoT space, working with a number of startup companies that are developing the hardware, but they're wanting to share that data back with council and vice versa. So there is value, and one of the things that actually I'm doing, I think next week, is working with our tech school, which is a coordinated program with the local secondary schools around how data can be used in year 11 and 12 as a program of innovation and thought. And so we've got a session going with the secondary school students to how can they look into it and use it in their programs within the school. So there's definitely value that is coming from it.
Yeah. Okay. Can I Oh, sorry, Ankana.
Oh, sorry, no, I was just going to say that we in the ACT, we sponsor and participate on GovHack every year. And I mean, it's a really great weekend. We hear from the community about, some of the problems that we as governments face and how do we actually look at data, open data differently. And they then help us through the weekend saying, what's missing is we can't answer this question because you haven't released XYZ data set. So working in that type of forum is really helpful. And from an open data perspective, some of our agencies build open data community partnerships. So working with organizations, with companies around, well, actually, what value does this data have for you, and how do we continue to uplift our open data release program? So I suppose it's an ongoing partnership, and as I mentioned, data flows is really the critical for any digital economy, and so I suppose working with the community is really essential, and listening, hearing, but participating in joined up partnerships is really also essential to continuing to, I guess, improve what data we provide out there, but importantly, learn from the value that the data has for community, partners.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to talk about the visualization of data for a moment, if I can. Ankana, when I went to the ACT Open Data Portal, whatever was above the fold of the screen, I kind of had a quick scan. I saw the word heat map. I'm an urban planner by training, so I sort of naturally go to that sort of spatial maps. I don't look at tables or APIs or anything. I just want to sort of see what's going on. And you've got this cyclist crash heat map. Beautiful image, it does what it says on the label, which is a heat map of where the accidents are. Like, I really love that. That's tangible. I can see it. I can share that with my mum, right? And she can kind of get it.
Yep.
You know, when I jump into the sort of the landing page of the portals, and you know, I sort of see, you know, I can do tables, maps, analyze, export, API, custom views. It's all a bit tech, and I don't know how many general community users can sort of, you know, really navigate open data portals, but give me a heat map, and now you've really got me engaged. So I want to talk about the visualization of data, and it's no secret that I am more than a firm believer in the idea of the digital twin as a data platform that can do some really powerful things. I've also come from an area, and for a long time I did a lot of community engagement. Okay, so sort of a website over there that's engaging the community and taking feedback on a project or a plan or a product. So I'd like us to all step inside the shoes of a community member for a moment, and sort of, I want to talk about and get your views on where data is going from a community engagement perspective, and particularly a visualization perspective. I mean, the heat map, I love it. I imagine that we can totally have the capability. I could zoom into the third red dot down there near, you know, the river, to see that there's, I'm making this up, you know, there's been 44 accidents there. I should be able to be dropped into Google Street View and have everything in 3D around me, and I can see the pins on the pavement. Where are we going with the visualization and the engagement with the community around data? If that kind of makes sense, because that's still open data, right? I mean, it's just,
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so one of our core leading principles is that we are community centered in everything we do, especially when it comes to data. So keeping your data safe is one, but releasing it where it's important to keep you safe further. So your example of the cycle crash is such an important data set that presenting it in easy to consume formats is really critical. Some of these amazing smart cities around the world have beautiful websites where the data is gorgeously visualized. Again, in order to give the community easy, consumable forms of actually making decisions on the fly. And so I think that in fact is a really great example of the benefits of releasing data that, you know, at one time might have been, hey, but you know, a bit of a risk averse culture may say, well, actually, should we be releasing that information? Can people be identified? So really, I think it really covers off on all of those key issues of government needing to release data. Now, open data platforms have some really great capabilities, and we're only just touching on the potential in that space. And so I'm a spatial analyst as well back in the day. It's been a while since I've coded in Python, but I am all about I'm a pictures person, you know, that people consume data in different forms. Some people actually do prefer it in a paragraph as opposed to in a data table or a map or a graph. But each visualization, each presentation, each data storytelling helps. And so I do believe that data and digital tools are just only, you know, exponentially growing, but only at its infancy. And really over time, we will have really great ways of presenting the information. In terms of I suppose the growth of open data, really, I think the sky's the limit as long as we have good ethical practice behind it as government. But like I said, I think the data and digital tools that others are using are a lot more advanced than some of us. But as we learn from others, as we hear how data is consumed, in what form, so some people actually, you know, release the data, give us an API, and we'll create an app. And those apps are really helpful in making people making decisions. So we've got our light rail data being used all the time. So I think it's just about making it available for the community to use in whatever form they want.
Okay. Paul or Matthew, thoughts, comments, reactions? Paul?
Yeah, so I think there's a real balance to be struck there, because on the one hand, as Anjana said, it's about making the data accessible to people, to your communities. So visualization helps it be understood. However, it does take investment. And so I think as governments, there's a balance to be struck between investing in making the data available and then how much you actually pour into the visualization. And the reality is, there are people out there that will visualize it for you. We saw with COVID-19 a number of players and dashboards popping up, and people wanting to make the data more communicable. But I actually think that there's a real growing area of journalism where the journalists of now and into the future will be the communicators of data on behalf of government. So government makes the data available and in good, helpful format. The journalists will take over and tell the story, start the debate, the informed debate in the public domain. And so we're starting to see that in New Zealand. It's growing in fits and starts, but I think there's real potential there. And I think it takes a bit for the media companies to understand and appreciate the change. The challenge from the journalist perspective is that it actually takes quite a lot of time to work with data and to create a good engaging visualization, and particularly an interactive one, which engages you even more. So you can start asking questions of the data and get a change in the visual response. I mean, I know for New Zealand Herald, for example, the biggest hit a page of their site ever got was a visualization of the real-time visualization of the elections panning out. And yet still, the investment in data specialists to start creating stories from data is relatively minimal. So, but I think, yeah, I think government should do some work, but not over-invest in visualization. And in fact, there was a study done by Spain back in about 2014, where they did some research into what they call the intermediary domain, where people took the data and reinterpreted it and visualized it, or used it in other ways to communicate. And I think there was 130 businesses sprung up in a year after they started releasing a serious amount of data. So there's potential there for a whole market.
Absolutely. Matthew, I'm sitting here on your data exchange. The 3D massing model is coming. You're obviously seeing that there's some value in three-dimensional data and visualization. What can you share with us? Why?
Yeah, look, I think for us that we really found that, and I think there was a comment early on around having it on data.gov and is it duplicated here, that originally when we put it out there, it was consumed by the data geeks and those that were looking for data, and that's fine. But we really wanted to take it to a level that the businesses on the street and our community that don't understand it can actually easily interpret and see that data. And I agree with Paul that there is a balance between having it out there and then creating the pretty around that. But we've found since we launched a new platform that is a lot easier for, I suppose, the mum and dad or the non-data geek to get in and quickly take a tree data set and press it on a map and see things by a few click of the buttons, and the world's not going to blow up. That there's a lot more engagement with that, and that having some of those easy to use tools around that has really started to allow people to dive in and create confidence around that. For us, we do have part of the private section is a 3D model. We have had a 3D model for 10 years now, and it's quite a large developed model of our CBD and broader view. So we do have it online now, and we have a full LiDAR set in there as well. And we do have a few people that do log in and use that. And we're working on a 3D extraction tool for that as well, so that it will become part of this exchange in months to come, where you can come in and see this data ingested in a 3D space as well. And we crowdsource that. It's built via our own staff as well as developers. So when someone builds a building in Geelong, we give them extractions out of our data, and they give us back a new model to populate our data set with. So for us, that's definitely the new area. We also work with Deakin University around that as well, and they use that very heavily in their architecture school, as well as the development community in Geelong use it very heavily as well.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Oh,
Sorry. Go, Paul. Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, building on what Matthew said, so Wellington City Council have done something very similar. In fact, they've created a virtual reality data set. And yeah, the engagement that they can have with people on topics like sea level rise, for example. So if you can actually virtually wade around the city, it has a lot bigger impact than even just seeing a picture on screen, you know. So yeah, that's quite an exciting avenue for visualization.
Yeah. Anjana?
Yeah, likewise. So our digital strategy, which is on our website, also proposes a digital twin for Canberra. I think it's in fact the next growth area, I suppose, in data is how do we use our data to inform decisions. So our development organizations are already using 3D, have been for very many years, and if I could add 4D as well. So really, it's about the opportunities are there. I mentioned data digital tools. I mean, the potential is infinite now. And so for us to make our data available in a way that people can use it, and so where 3D data comes in, I mean, it's very exciting space to be in, pardon the pun. But there is the opportunity for a digital twin is only going to grow for not just cities, but for organizations that are building, that are developing, that are making our communities clean, safe, healthy. So I think it's a really great opportunity and good times.
I'm going to share a slide now, which is going to kind of be the precursor to my next question, which is going to be our final question. So we asked our registrants upon registration a question, and the question was, as a provider or user of open data, have you assessed the benefit it has delivered to your stakeholders? So what I was trying to get at there, a bit of a clunky question, but what I was trying to get at was, is this making a difference, and are we measuring or reporting on what that sort of difference is that it's making? Are we changing lives? Is open data changing lives? Is it, what's the sort of impact that it's having? The responses there are kind of pretty interesting, and you take what you can from a poll of just a simple one question. So, have you assessed the benefits of open data on your stakeholders? So we've kind of like got a bit of a three-way split there in terms of yes, no, not applicable. My final question is around this, and I want to ask you at point blank, is this making a difference? But I kind of just don't want responses like, oh, well, of course it is. Yeah, yes. Can you give me something? Can you give me something tangible? Can you tell me, and I'm making this up and I'm just going to a place that I go to, how many homeless people did we take off the streets as a result of open data? How many tons of greenhouse gas emissions was reduced? How many new jobs? Can you respond with a level of tangibility in there to that question? I may be asking too much. I don't know where we're at as an industry in terms of measuring the impact of open data, but I'd love to go down swinging and ask that one if I can. Who'd like to kick off?
Well, I will. So we do need to develop an open data value measurement program. But I suppose the whole point of open data is that it's presented out into the community, and the benefit should be infinite. And so the fact is that we present it for the community to use. The value proposition then is when we hear back from the community who use the data. So if we hear back from an organization, that's when we actually get to find out, well, what did you use, what data did you use, what purpose, and so on. So the value measurement program has to be pretty targeted. But I'll give you an example. We actually did receive a letter from a private company that uses, well, very many data sets. And basically for them, they were saying that they really value the open data program. They've accessed more than 10 data sets, and that they've built their data products so that the products that they serve the community, value back for citizens, visitors to the ACT, using our data. So data from roads, what roads we have, to the actual addresses, the boundaries that we have, the digital cadasters, the freight routes. I mean, aerial imagery. So that was mentioned earlier. So they basically said without all of these data sets, their product actually wouldn't exist. And so what their product does is, in fact, helps people get from A to B, helps people get to where they need to be in a safe way. People make decisions through their journeys, and they can, in fact, then use that data again and again, and in fact reuse it by on-selling. We talked about the data economy to other organizations that then require same sort of mobility data. So I suppose there is a life outside of when we release our data on the open platform, when organizations, companies produce products from it on sells further. And so the company is successful, and then the data as an economy then becomes data as an asset for that company, and then they then further benefit other organizations, including public sector.
Okay, Matthew, same question. How would you respond?
Similar answer. Definitely, if I was to turn around to say today, is there a benefit? It's hard to measure. Definitely hard to measure, and we are working on a program at the moment on, or how do you go that data set made a difference. We do know that some definitely do make a difference, and again, that's from feedback from people that do use that, especially when we're dealing with developers and a lot of planners out there, and that space. We know that them using our data and some of our 3D data saves them thousands of dollars. So there's a real monetary value that comes into that. But how can we measure some of that more broad asset data that we put out there? How does that come back? And it's difficult to take. Whilst we might ask people for feedback on how they're using it and how it's make a difference, we don't necessarily get a lot of that direct feedback. So one of the definite things for us on the to-do list is looking at how we measure the ROI on this particular space, and that if I'm spending all this time integrating, whilst there is community value out there, over here, if I'm making that spend transparent, how do you know if that's created value? So we're trying to be transparent. So how do we be transparent with what we're actually doing in this particular space as well? So there is still a real gap in this area, and it's one that I think a lot of people are searching for on, or how do we measure that value?
Yeah, okay. Paul, I'm sure you've solved this one. Bring it home for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, so measurement is a challenge, but the best way that we've found is to tell stories. So if you go to data.gov.nz/showcase, we've got I don't know, about 30 odd stories there, and that's just some of them. The most recent 3 are very short videos, and one of them I think is particularly important. So when you talk about making a real impact, I mean, we could talk about, say, the application called ForwardWorks that was built as a result of the earthquakes in Christchurch, where they've brought data on infrastructure and roading and building outlines, etc., and created an app where contractors can put in what they're going to do, and you can look at what's happening over what time and make sure you don't line up your concrete trucks to go down a street where they've ripped it up to fix the sewerage and that kind of thing. They can quite clearly demonstrate millions of dollars of savings over the last few years in doing that. But it's, you know, and climate change and all of those big things could be changed for open data, but to make a real impact, to change lives, you don't have to think so big. So one of the case studies on our website is about an app that's being piloted. As a private company have teamed up with a charity called, what are they called? CCS Disability. And so what they do is they manage the parking permits for disabled car parks. And they've created an app which helps you through the data of where these parks are, helps you find it. And if you get to it and it's occupied by somebody that doesn't have a permit, you can use your phone, take a photo, add a couple of pieces of detail and submit it to your local council, and they can respond and tow the vehicle out of the way. Now, there's about 12,000 pilot users who said that that changes their everyday life. It means that, you know, something that should be simple for them to go into town and do is simple, rather than becoming a mammoth mission trying to find where they can park and get out of their car. And it makes them feel valued as members of the community because, you know, there is an effort made to make their life easier. And to me, that is open data changing lives on an everyday basis. As I say, it doesn't have to be a global impact, it can be a very local impact. But yeah, you know, you can, for some data, you can make an economic proposition on the value of it, but some things you just can't put dollars on, but they certainly impact people's well-being. And once again, you put a data set out and it might not be used for 10 years, and then suddenly one day it could save somebody's life, or it could solve a real complex problem. You know, take infrastructure data that Matthew was talking about. It might not get used much on a day-to-day basis, but then you have something like you know, a natural event where suddenly where all your infrastructure is hugely valuable, not only for government to help work together and fix it, but also for your community to know where facilities are and so forth. So yeah, tell the stories.
Excellent, thank you, Paul, and also Matthew and Anjana. Thank you so much for joining us. That's been a great discussion. Just finally, for our viewers, we've got a range of additional monthly data dialogues coming up. Digital twins for the city next month, then shared data agreements in September, October, powering the new data world with 5G. Still plenty of good discussion around data coming up. Also, many of our conversations around data are over on our podcast, The Smart Cities Chronicles. Paul, Anjana, Matthew, thank you so much for making today's data dialogue enjoyable, interesting. The topic of opening up open data, I think we've had a great conversation. I'd like to also thank our guests that have joined us from all parts of the world. From us, we'll sign off. Enjoy your day. Be safe. We look forward to chatting again soon. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.